This podcast episode is going to be about illiteracy and my experiences with illiteracy. Let's get into it. Yes, I was illiterate for most of my life, and I hid it. Um, I was ashamed of it, and I'm only 18, turning 19, but I can tell you this is a much bigger problem because 100 million over 100 million Americans between the ages of 16 to 75 can't read above a sixth grade reading level or sixth grade equivalent reading level. I was homeschooled growing up, so I didn't really have a good education, I'll admit. Um, And I started to learn how to read because I became a Norse pagan and I wanted to learn about the Norse gods more than anything. So I struggled to read that. I struggled to understand Norse mythology, and it's hard to read even for a good reader. But I struggled to read it every day for 2 years, every single day. And that started back in 2016. And that's what I did. It took me 6 months to read a book about a fairy tale book. It took me 6 months to get through it. It took me 2 years to complete a book about Norse mythology, and that's of course that's a source of shame, but it's something that needs to be said. Illiteracy is not cheap at all. 100 million people or more in the United States can't read that well. Like at least over 40 million of them can't function. They are functionally illiterate. They can't read basic sentences. They can maybe read a label on a medication. That's about it. They can't read complex sentences. More than that, can read complex sentences. They can maybe read, something on a sheet of paper, but that's about it. They cannot, say, read a book. That would be above their reading level. They cannot read a whole book through. They cannot read multiple paragraphs. And they can function a lot more, but they struggle to read anything more complex than a simple paragraph. It's not cheap. It costs the U.S. government billions of dollars. We talk about how bad the education system is, but we skip a step. We say, well, SAT scores are bad or ACT scores are bad, but no one talks about why that is. We talk about the education system is bad, but we don't talk about the end product of the education system. We don't talk about the millions of people left without the basic skills to read and write and do basic math, let alone the fact that we are extremely terrible at scientific literacy. Scientific literacy is, for all intents and purposes, it's not very good. And it costs the country billions. And in the world, 1 to 2 billion people are illiterate. And it costs the world trillions. And it needs to be said that no one wants to talk about illiteracy. No one wants to acknowledge that it's a thing, that it costs, the world terribly. And we just ignore it. We deny it. We don't talk about it. We talk about how the education system is bad and that it leads to criminalization, but we don't talk about how illiteracy plays in that. We don't talk about how people not knowing how to read and write leaves them unable to take their medication properly, how it leaves them unable to hold down a job, And right now, during the pandemic, a lot of these people have children who are school aged. So they are forced to help their children with homework, but most of them, many of them, are embarrassed. They don't know what to do. And they're put in a position of helping their children with homework that they never had to. They're having to take on more responsibility than they did when their children were in school, because they were able to, you know, their children would just do it while they were at school. And don't get me wrong, this is still a problem no matter if it's the pandemic or not, but it's worse. It is worse. This problem is worsened. These parents couldn't help their children with their homework before, but now it's exacerbated because these children don't have the option to go to their teacher and ask questions. They don't have that as an option anymore. They don't have the option to have a tutor because it's not safe. They don't have that option. They don't have the option to get tutored by upperclassmen or by university students. They don't have that as an option anymore. So it's much worse. On top of that, it leads to people joining extremist organizations like the KKK, like the neo-Nazis, other things like that. It leads to, child sex trafficking, as hard as that is to say, and hear. It's true. It contributes to women becoming child brides because they don't have an education. Women who can't read are twice as likely to become child brides, to become, essentially, even some of them for human trafficking. If you can't read and write, your chances of being human trafficked are much higher. Extremist organizations recruit these people because they're gullible, because they don't have any resources. You need to be able to read above a fourth grade reading level to even work at McDonald's. And many of these people cannot. And that's something that needs to be said when we're talking about what the education system does or what it doesn't do. It doesn't give people the necessary skills to do these things. And it's not at all what people think it is. It's something I care about deeply, obviously. And I understand its consequences. It leaves people, unfortunately, it leaves people in a position to know little about what they're supposed to do. And that's why people want to hold on to factory jobs and things like that extra hard, because those factory jobs don't require reading. The steel mills in particular, I know this one, really well in a sense. The steel mills didn't require and don't require extensive reading. But if you want to go up in the ranks and you want to, to get promoted, you have to be able to read, and so people quit. And that's what happens. They work in factories because factories don't require reading. And if they do, these people, what they will do, if they require any sort of reading at all, they will memorize, colors and patterns and things like that so they can get around the reading part. They'll memorize, what something looks like. And they might be able to recognize the word itself if they associate it long enough. But that's about it. And isn't cheap at all. 1 to 2 billion in the world can't read proficiently in their own languages. It costs the world trillions. It leads to human trafficking. You're more likely, people who are illiterate are more likely to be drug addicts, more likely to be child brides, more likely to be child soldiers, more likely to be naively recruited into extremist organizations. Um, and it it takes its toll. If only 1 to 2% of people were more illiterate in this country, it would save the country billions. It's not cheap by any means. And it leaves people feeling empty and like no one understands, no one is there because there's no programs in the area. A lot of these people would like to go to a program to learn how to read and write, but they don't exist. Many places don't have those. And they can't, ask for help. And of course, you're going to say, well, why don't they just, figure it out? It's like, because it's not going to work that way. To comprehend basic words, it takes a long time. It took me 2 years to be able to read a book all the way through, to even understand basic sentences, to even learn basic phonemic skills. It takes months of every day training. And these people, a lot of them have jobs. They have things they have to do. And on top of not having the time or know how to, to find someone to help them, they are embarrassed. They are ashamed. They don't want anyone to know. And they hide it well. They say things like, oh, will you read this for me? Or could you do this for me for the braver ones? Or they say nothing and they hide. Illiteracy is not a thing that is just a minor issue. It affects millions of people in the United States and billions, 1 to 2 billion around the world. It is not a minor issue at all. It's something that is just not talked about when we talk about, the education system being poor. It's just skipped over. Like, the education system is bad. People don't have jobs. Ever think about the fact that people don't have the skills to even get a job? And don't get me wrong, I don't think I know there's, racism and other things like that. I know that there's the other issues. The education system is bad, don't get me wrong. But when people talk about the education system being bad, they don't talk about the end result of the bad education system. They just skip over it. Like, oh yeah, the education system's bad. It's bad to the economy. It's costing money. Do you know why it's costing money? Because of illiteracy, because of innumeracy, because of scientific illiteracy, because people don't have historical illiteracy. They don't know history. That's why. These are forms of ignorance, and that's not to be derogatory. It's just the fact that people don't know, and they don't know where to start. And people are gonna and do say stupid things like, well, how do these people function? How do they live? They work in industries and they try to keep those industries alive where they don't have to read. Like the clothing industry. You don't need to know how to read to make clothes. You don't need to know how to read to make, steel rings and things like that. In the steel industry, you don't need to know how to read to do those things. They work in those industries. They work in, they work in the textile industry. They work in the, the manufacturing industry, in parts of the industry where they don't have to read. And it it does lead to lifelong things. They are more likely to be obese. They are more likely to be recruited into extremist organizations, as I've said. They are more likely to become child brides because illiteracy is worse in the world for women than it is for men proportionately. And it it isn't by any means a thing that we should deny. We should talk about it. But that's where I'm going to end it here, and I will be bringing this up again in a second part. So this is part one. This is the end for now.